Now, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking, and for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Per the motion adopted March 26, 2024, we are hearing testimonies in relation to the matters revealed in the Winnipeg lab documents. Now, we have some substitutions today. Mr. Nakvi is in for MP Oliphant, Mr. Angus for MP McPherson, Mr. Cooper for MP Lantzman, and MP Ellis for Mr. Couric. Mr. Couric will be a new permanent member of this committee, I understand. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses for our first panel. Nathalie D. G. Drouin is the Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, accompanied by David Vigneault, Director of Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Ms. Drouin, you have up to 5 minutes to deliver your opening remarks, and we thank you for your patience while we got the voting business out of the way.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for the opportunity to address myself to the committees and answer your questions regarding the National Microbiology Laboratory. I'm accompanied today by David Vigneault, you know well, Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS. I've been appointed Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security and Intelligence Advisor on the 27th of January last. In this capacity, I coordinate the agency's National Security and Intelligence Agency and carry out critical analyses.
CSIS provided a briefing to officials of the National Lab to help them better understand potential foreign interference or espionage, including how employees could be vulnerable to outside pressure. And soon after, PIAC identified 2 employees at the National Lab who might be at risk and flagged their concerns to CSIS. PIAC subsequently noticed certain irregularities in the 2 scientists' activities, which prompted PIAC to initiate an investigation that in turn uncovered additional reasons for concern. As the 2 scientists' conduct became clearer through the investigation, PIAC took action, including seeking assistance from CSIS and referring matters to the RCMP for criminal investigation. Both employees were placed on leave and ultimately had their security clearances revoked, and in January 2021, their employment was terminated. Important lessons were learned from this matter, and security policies were improved accordingly. However, I think it is important to remember that PIAC was successful at detecting and removing a threat following awareness and vigilance, and by executing a robust, thorough process supporting by security partners. Le Laboratoire National de
The National Microbiology Laboratory is world-renowned for the excellence of its research and the many contributions of its researchers, men and women, to the public health. The lab is a prime example of the rich culture of open, collaborative culture of research in the sciences, of which Canada can be extremely proud. And it's precisely because of this reputation that for some time now, the security agents across the country have been warning about threats to Canada's scientific community.
To understand. Innovation drives economic prosperity and technological advantage. Competition among states is focusing attention on edges of science. New discoveries can be immensely beneficial or, unfortunately, can be used to do harm. Canada produces world-class research in critical areas such as artificial intelligence, robotics, aerospace, quantum technology, and the life sciences. Our innovations make us a target. The People's Republic of China is the most significant research security threat actor in Canada, given its targeting of academia, government, and private sector institutions. Just as with PRC, political interference and transnational repression activities, China uses a wide variety of methods to pursue advanced technologies. As this committee is aware, China is not the only country of concern. For example, we saw strong indication that Russian hackers tried to steal COVID-19 vaccine research during the pandemic. Comme d'autres témoins vous l'ont déjà indiqué,
As you've already heard from other witnesses, the agency has learned many lessons from the situation at the Winnipeg National Laboratory, and laboratory safety has been improved. In addition, the Prime Minister has asked me to make recommendations to him in relation to this situation. My review has already begun. I visited the laboratory on the 25th of April last. My visit allowed me to ask questions and learn directly from researchers on site. We discussed the sensitive nature of the work carried out at the lab and how safety measures have been improved.
Identified ways we can continue to strengthen our research security, but I will also be mindful of the need to avoid discouraging innovation or collaboration with onerous security requirements. One thing is certain: engagement between research organizations and security is critical for raising awareness and building resilience. For example, the new Research Security Center at Public Safety Canada is providing advice to institutions across the country on how to protect their research while pursuing their work responsibly in the modern geopolitical environment. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee, Canada's national security agencies are committed to protecting Canadian research. Thank you very much, and we'll be prepared to answer your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chuang. I appreciate that. Mr. Chong, the first 6 minutes are yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Duran, for appearing in front of us today. My first questions are for you. You mentioned the first flag went up in August of 2018, and so it took till January 20th of 2021 to terminate Drs. Chu and Dr. Cheng from the employment of the Government of Canada. And so what we're trying to understand here at the committee is the process that took 2.5 years to result in that termination. And so my first question is, when did the Privy Council office first learn of the concerns regarding Drs. Chu and Cheng?
I don't have specific date to offer to you. As you know, I was not at the Privy Council, but this is not the reason. But I know that my predecessor have briefed the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office regarding the situation at the lab.
Would you be able to tell us roughly you can provide that information later to the chair of the committee. Could you provide us roughly the month and year that information was brought to PCO's attention?
I would be able to provide, a timing in which that, but I believe it was not in 2018.
Yes, thank you, because that would help us in writing our report with recommendations. My next question is for Mr. Vigneault, and also regarding timing. The first flag goes up in August of 2018. The lab is not secured until 10 months later on July 5th of 2019. Do you think that is an appropriate length of time to secure a government facility in the context of what happened? Or do you think that in the future those timelines should be tightened?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Chong. If I remember, I think I testified that the initial concerns that were raised initially were more of the nature of administrative issues as opposed to national security. And I think that explains in part why some of these delays. One thing that is clear, however, is that since 2018, and as Madame Drouin just mentioned, the system is learning quite a bit more. We as an intelligence service are much more proactive. We're sharing more information in private and in public about these issues. And I think all of us are, if you want, have been raising our game. So I would not expect that it would necessarily be the same timelines today. I think people's awareness of the threat to their research would be much different today than before.
You know, I worked in the private sector before I came to public office and had to engage in workforce reductions during my time. They weren't always easy things to do, but never did it take 2.5 years to terminate somebody for cause. And, you know, in this situation, from start to finish, the process took almost 2.5 years. Do you think that that is an appropriate length of time? And similar question to that, have things changed within the government of Canada so that when a situation like this comes up in the future, it doesn't take 2.5 years to terminate somebody for unreliability and for losing their security clearance status?
Mr. Chair, I can speak to this question from a CSIS point of view in terms of our engagement. As I mentioned in my previous testimony, a colleague of Mr. Chung was talking about the pace at which CSIS was able to produce its intelligence to PIAC. So I think this was done in a very effective manner in terms of time. In terms of the specific administrative decisions, I would refer the member to PIAC for for their own assessment of how they have been managing the issue. But I think it's fair to say the spirit of your question, Mr. Chong, is that things have changed inside the government as well as within PIAC specifically, as I understand our colleagues have testified. And I would imagine that today things would be much faster.
Okay.
If you allow, I'd like to add a couple of things here. First of all, it's always easy to look at what happened in the past with our retrospective lens and then see how easy it was. So that is my first caveat. However, I agree with you that from the first signal, but to the benefits of CSIS and PIAC, they are the one who have identified the first signal. But from the first signal to the moment the two scientists were put on leave, yes, there's a timeline that needs to be looked at. However, it's not like things were not done, like a fact-finding exercise was done.
I'll just say this, like, we recently had a globally systemically important bank whose number 2 executive was terminated after an investigation that lasted less than 4 weeks. And this bank is a systemically financially important bank. And this wasn't a junior employee. And so what I'm saying to you is that my experience coming from the private sector, having had to do these difficult kinds of things, you know, it never took this length of time. And so that's one of the concerns I think many of us have on this committee, is that it took almost 2.5 years from the first flag going up to a decision to terminate, which seems an awfully long period of time.
Mr. Chong, thank you for your time. We'll now go to Mr. Nakabe for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to welcome the CSIS director back to this meeting. I'm not sure how many times we're going to ask him to keep coming back. I think this is at least the 3rd time, so thank you for your patience. I know you are a very busy person. I want to also welcome Madame Drouin and congratulate her on her new assignment as the security advisor at the Privy Council office. Thank you. I've always enjoyed working with you. Madame Drouin, I'm going to start with you to ask the question. In your experience thus far, and I know you've been with PCO for some time, what role does the Privy Council office plays in protecting Canada's research and intelligence, if any?
the role I'm playing. So
Or in the Privy Council's office?
so maybe I think my role encompasses all security, national security aspect, and we know now that the national security also has an economic component. It can also have a health component, a climate component. So all that to say that our innovation and researchers is something, and the safety of our researchers, it's something that is under my purview, of course, with the support of key departments, mainly the science departments and the national security agencies.
So, research and protecting Canada's research, it's an active part of your portfolio in terms of ensuring from a security intelligence perspective.
I think what I'm saying that is that researchers' innovation, as I said in my opening remarks, can be target of and can be victims of national security threat. So I need to make sure that the system we have in place, whether it's the legislative framework, the procedures, that it is something that is being looked at by the different key departments and agencies.
Okay, that's fair. And then to what extent does Government of Canada monitor patent filings by public servants? Is this something that is typically investigated during the process of security screening?
So there is a lot of layers in terms of that. So if I only talk about labs, for example, employees are subject to security clearance at the secret level. They have also to respect the legislation that guide laboratories. And depending on whether or not they need a top secret, they will have to respect another layer of protection. So there's a lot of layers in terms of what they need to protect.
Okay. In your opening remarks, you talked about that the Public Health Agency of Canada acted fairly in an expedited manner when they learned about these two scientists and took steps in order to ensure that that the National Microbiology Lab is protected and the work that is being done there. But you also said, however, that there were important lessons that were learned. Can you articulate to us, in your view, what are those important lessons are, and what steps have, in your opinion, Privy Council Office and other government agencies are taking or have taken to implement those important lessons that you referred to?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So first of all, let me repeat that when PAC and the lab in particular received awareness briefing from CSIS, they themselves identified employees that were at risk, and they flagged those employees, and they found, unfortunately, other concerns. So those are the things that they have done. And then in terms of the lesson learned, I think it was on a couple of areas where they thought that some improvements were required. So first of all, on their management of their technology, making sure that, for example, they can trace who's accessing what, when, especially on the I will call that the administrative documents, not necessarily the research documents, but things, for example, the patterns and things like that. So they have strengthened their technology system to be able to trace who has access to what and when. They have also enhanced their security and facility access, making sure, for example, that visitors, for example, that they cannot move within the lab without any surveillance and without being escorted. They have done a lot of employees' communication and engagement, and this is a very important component because in order to prevent other situations like that, awareness is key. Employees can be vulnerable, and sometimes they don't realize that they are entering into a co-optee relationship. So awareness is something very important. And just maybe a parenthèse regarding that, I think that what the lab went through and the exercise that you're doing right now is completely unfortunate, but at the same time, it helps other scientists to realize that those things are real and that they need to care about security.
Thank you, Ms. Dron. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes.
Merci, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Within the scope of our work of this committee, we've discussed a number of things. BFS Global, for example, is led by a consortium which is co-owned, I suppose, with Chinese authorities, and they're still requiring for visas, Chinese, here in Canada. We were quite surprised to see that no security clearance has been done for this enterprise. And all the revelations, of course, as concerns the Winnipeg laboratory, led us to request a documentation, which are part of the report today. When Mr. Vigneault appeared before the committee previously, I cited a Montreal Journal newspaper article that since 2018, the PRC was conducting manipulative activities in Canada, thought always that China would be a reliable partner that we could cooperate with on a scientific area. How do we explain the gap then between CSIS conclusions that there have been malicious activities by the PRC in research areas, technological, and a sort of easygoing attitude by the federal government since that time? Always felt that China was a reliable scientific partner. Well, among our partners, our various partners, no one has completely cut the links and contacts with China in research matters. It's not very easily to cut all contact with or links with China and still promote good research. That's not to say that this cooperation has to be done blindly, as we might do with the Five Eyes partnership. I don't think it would be to any advantage or benefit to Canada to cut completely our links with China. And as you said, we have to go into it with our eyes open and fully aware of the items that were brought to the fore by CSIS, that China can use these information in their business enterprises. So we could have or should have accepted this message from CSIS and put into place the mechanisms to control it earlier on. Well, with hindsight, it's easy to say that we should have done more sooner. But I'd like to draw your attention to another item here. And I really believe on the importance of awareness. We may have partners or employees who began working with the Canadian government without having been co-opted by China and were perhaps later co-opted. We have to protect these individuals, and we have to encourage our partners to be on the lookout, on the alert for behaviors which might tend that someone would be co-opted. Well, I'm sure you're aware of the 1,000 Talents Plan. The two individuals in question here were party of that plan, and that the Wuhan lab is still not on our list of the list of institutions named by Security Canada. And how can we go about it then if we're not, if we want to be wide-eyed and alert? Well, there are some organizations with which Canada has no particular agreement. There is no contract between or agreement between the Winnipeg lab and that of Wuhan. Other global parties or stakeholders may have relations with their microbiology lab, and eventually there may be some projects shared in common, but there's no open contract or open understanding or entente at this time. My last question, Madame Drouin, just so we can understand quite clearly. Overall, Parliament, one and all, were very surprised that these documents were shared with were not being shared with us, we parliamentarians. So, how could you explain that? Well, I was at Justice Canada before that, so I can give you that perspective, if you will. The idea was not to refuse to share, but to share it with authorities who were in a position to accept and make use of those documents, because they're very sensitive documents. Until some remedial measures were taken by the laboratory, it would not be in the interest or Canada's security to expose these to the public. So it wasn't a refusal to participate and share, but it's to share in the proper forum, in the proper context with those who were enabled to do something with them, be it administrative or political. Well, and in the justice sphere as well. Thank you very much, Madam.
We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you so much to our witnesses. Welcome, Madame Drouin. I've only dealt with you indirectly through our shared work on trying to get justice for the survivors of St. Anne's Residential School. Well, maybe I'd say it's partial work. But I would begin with our representative from CSIS. You know, my hair's turned gray while I've been in Parliament, and I remember a time when questions were raised about intellectual property theft from China, going back to my time when I was first elected in representing mining communities. So it was CSIS. Do you have a long list of research or concerns about intellectual property theft with the People's Republic of China?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. We indeed do have a fairly long list of concerns regarding the PRC's attempt to steal Canada's secrets, both the government secrets, but also more and more what is being developed in our cutting-edge universities, our research laboratories. We know that, as I've testified in this forum recently, there is a stated goal of the government of China to make the People's Liberation Army the most sophisticated, capable military by 2049. And one of the way they need to do that is also by stealing intellectual property from anywhere that they want in the world. And Canada is indeed part of that. We have seen during COVID as well a very sophisticated effort of the part of the PRC and other countries to try to steal, in this case, our life science research, because it was in their interest to try to understand what we were doing, and if they could steal it and manufacture a vaccine or gain an advantage, they would absolutely do so. So that's why we have been saying publicly at CSIS for years now that what is making Canada prosperous today and what will be the source of our prosperity in the future years is at risk, and we need to raise our defenses to protect that.
Thank you. So in October 2017, when the Chinese National Institute for Food and Drug Control filed a patent for the inhibitor of the Ebola virus that included one of the workers who was working at the Winnipeg lab, but they didn't mention her name, but the patent went to China. Was CSIS aware at that time that had happened?
So, Mr. Chair, as you will understand, I cannot reveal the specific nature of our intelligence, but I will maybe take a step back from the specific question and answer Mr. Angus by saying that we would not, as an intelligence service, be aware of all the patents that they filed in another country. But that would require a capacity that no country in the world has to be able to monitor all of this in real time. But what I think is fair to say is that we understand and we adapt our techniques in our investigations by studying the behavior and the tradecraft of our adversaries. And this is one of the area that our investigators, working with our partners in the security intelligence community in Canada and around the world, are very much attuned to.
Okay, fair play. I think the worst thing is after the fact of doing gotcha moments when these are very complex and there's all manner of things happening at the same time. But I remember the free trade debate when Stephen Harper and the Conservatives were pushing a full free trade agreement with China, and we had raised serious questions about their record and theft issues of intellectual property theft. So that gets signed in 2012, and in 2014, for example, the National Research Council was forced to shut down its servers. This is our top scientific research organization because of hacking from China. We had to shut down Treasury Board servers at a point because of hacking from China, the Bank of Canada from China, even Parliament Hill was targeted. So I'm not going to ask you for specifics, but were red flags being raised to the government? Like, we've just signed a free trade agreement with this country, and yet all our key scientific, government, and financial portals are being targeted by hackers without. Were there investigations hypothetically done? Were they state actors hypothetically? Could you give us a broader picture so we know how we ended up in this situation with the Winnipeg labs?
Mr. Chair, I think it's fair to say that there were indeed a number of flags raised. I was personally involved in the 2014 cyber hack by the PRC against the NRC, and I can tell you that all the right authorities in Canada and also abroad that were of concern were much aware of what was going on. I think it is around that period of time that people realized that things were changing in the PRC under the leadership of Xi Jinping. I think we saw a beginning of a change in their approach and the aggressiveness at which they would pursue their interest. And those other hacks that you mentioned, Mr. Angus, about the two other organizations around the federal government, there were indeed a number of investigation of flags. There's been tremendous amount of work done by our colleagues at the communication security establishment to be able to prevent a number of these. I think it's The statistics is mind-boggling in terms of the amount of attempt against government institution every day. But more and more what we see is that those entities like PRC hacking groups are just not going after government institutions, but they're also going after private sector academia to be able to acquire the kind of information and data that they need to pursue their objectives.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, thank you for that.
Your time is up, Mr. Angus. But
Sorry, I'm
we'll,
just
we'll be
getting
back
started.
to you. You had your 6
Okay.
minutes. You did. Where does time go when you're having fun? I see Gene Vincent in behind you there, the blue caps. Yeah, we all remember this. As we
Gene Vincent and
go
the blue
to our
caps,
second
indeed.
round, I'd also like to recognize Kenny Chu in the room, who has, I'm sure, followed our proceedings with great interest, having been kind of on the leading edge of the more public form of interference. Recognize you, sir, and thank you for being here tonight. Now, we go to our second round, and we will begin for 5 minutes with Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will direct my questions to Director Vineau. Director Vineau, at any point was CSIS or law enforcement under the suspicion that Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng would flee Canada to the PRC?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned numerous times at this committee, I cannot reveal the specific details of our investigation, and that would include specific information that was known at some specific points. I think we have been through the process that has been established here to provide our documents.
Let me ask you, sir.
There's been a lot of very specific details
limited.
provided.
My time is limited. I appreciate you're trying to answer. I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that they could very well have desired to flee to the PRC, which they now have. So why was what steps were taken or not taken to prevent them from fleeing to the PRC? These are two individuals who were and are under a criminal investigation.
Mr. Chair, as I think members know, CSIS is an intelligence organization, is not a law enforcement organization, and we have no powers to detain or intercept or arrest anyone.
Okay, thank you for that. When did Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng first come under the radar of CSIS, and when did CSIS first open an investigation into them?
Mr. Chair, the documents that have been provided to the committee indicate, and I think my testimony in previous appearances in front of your committee indicates that we first engaged PIAC in the guise of a threat briefing in August 2018, and that's at the tail end of that meeting that PIAC officials approached CSIS to raise concern with the two scientific.
So CSIS began looking into Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng sometime in the fall of 2018. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay. And at any point did CSIS brief the Prime Minister, Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor, or any minister in the government about Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng? And if so, when? And who?
Mr. Chair, we have provided numerous briefings to the officials that the member is speaking to. I do not have the specific timelines in front of me.
So that would have included the Prime Minister and his National Security and Intelligence Advisor.
That is accurate.
And would you undertake to provide the timelines to this committee of when those briefings took place?
Mr. Chair, we'll definitely undertake to try to collect that information to the best of our ability, yes.
Was an issues management note or IMU ever produced on the security breach at the Winnipeg lab?
The IMU notes are now very famous. I will have to, Mr. Chair, go back and verify if one was written. Yes.
Thank you. If you could undertake that, that would be appreciated. Did CSIS produce any intelligence reports or intelligence assessments on Dr. Chu or Dr. Cheng that are not part of the Winnipeg lab documents that were tabled in the House of Commons?
Mr. Chair, through you, do you mean other than the ones that were produced?
Suffer than the ones that were produced.
We have, Mr. Chair, produced a number of assessments that I have been speaking to in terms of the scientific research in Canada being targeted by foreign actors. I will have to double check if there were some specific over and above what was produced to the committee. I just don't know that.
Thank you for undertaking to get back to us on that. There was paragraph 54, for example, of the CSIS security assessment of Dr. Chu states that she gave access to 2 employees of a PRC institution whose work was not aligned with Canadian interests. What PRC institution is being referenced at paragraph 54 of that report?
Mr. Chair, as you know, the process by which these documents were produced to the committee went through a very elaborate review process with 3 distinguished judges. The information that is produced to the committee at this point is what is available, what we can release in the public domain. I will not be able to go further than that at this point, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. We'll now go to Mr. Fragaskatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both of you for being here tonight. Madame Drouin, if I can ask you about conversations that you would have had with counterparts, whether it's in the Five Eyes or G7, for example. I think about the future. I think about preventing things like this from happening again. Do you have, or have you had discussions with counterparts, if they're not, every country has a different system, of course, but colleagues who share a position like yours to compare and contrast approaches on ensuring something like this won't take place again?
Well, as you know, I have started that job in January of this year. But I did have some bilaterals with some colleagues where we talk about different risk. As I said, whether it's the risk related to artificial intelligence, securing our space, or economic security. We talk also about different risks, but not specific to managing labs, for example.
That's fine, insofar as the question of security is concerned, because we can focus on labs as we naturally are here. But you mentioned AI, for example. This is an emerging area and one that there's so many questions about. Do you have any thoughts on that specific issue?
On AI?
From a security perspective and what that means for Canadian security as it relates to China specifically.
So AI, as you know, there's a tremendous potential when it comes to AI, but also different risk related to that. So individual risk in terms of how you use AI, organizational risk in terms of potential of hacking system on the cyberspace. There's also systemic risk or ultimate risk when we stop controlling the machine and the machine is controlling you. So those are the big type of risk that international safeguard, and we like Canada to be kind of a lead player in terms of determining what should be those safeguards regarding AI for the future.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vigneault, if I can go to you, and I didn't expect to be talking about AI tonight, but you've raised it, and I think it's a relevant point. When we think about, again, prevention, what role does AI play? And I know it's very difficult to kind of speculate about the future, but this is an emerging area. What role could AI play in this regard in terms of securing? I'm not thinking in specifics here. I'm not talking about labs per se, but in our overall security, whether it's labs on the one hand, all the way to critical infrastructure. Does AI have a role to play? Is this something that security officials like yourself and counterparts like yours are talking about and looking to? Because there's the negative side of AI that's widely discussed, but we should make it work for us wherever we can, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Absolutely. We're trying to look at AI from the two sides of the coins. We need to look at it for how can we harness artificial intelligence in our own practices. We are at CSIS using AI for different processes already. We're working with partners in Canada and around the world to try to harness artificial intelligence from a national security point of view and how it could be of benefit. And we do that because we also understand, or try to understand to the best of our ability, the threat that comes from nefarious actors using AI. We've talked, for example, about how artificial intelligence can easily be used right now by fairly unsophisticated actors to be able to create deepfakes that are credible enough to lead someone to believe that indeed that action was done or those words were said by someone. And so it is not just a problem for the future, it's a problem for today. And the more we can work together on understanding, harnessing the power of AI and protecting ourselves will be great. And as was mentioned in Madame Drouin's opening remarks, Canada is one of the most dynamic areas in the world for artificial intelligence. We have some of the best scientists and some of the most cutting-edge research, and we know that this is a target for a number of people. And so we're working with the appropriate partners to try to secure that research and innovation.
Thank you very much. Fragaskatos. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Drouin, vous nous parliez.
Thank you very much. Madame Drouin, towards the end of your presentation, you were talking of the administrative sphere or the political sphere, and you seem to evoke that there may be a political solution. But perhaps to illustration of the perhaps lack of openness in the sharing of documents, we were prepared to go after the Speaker of the House. Is that not an example of this position of the government, as I was saying before? All due respect, no, it was not a refusal. It was a reticence, if you will, to share with that particular forum, if you will. Now, in politics, it's quite binary. Either it's yes or no. You do it or you don't. We were faced with a conflict, a conundrum, which was quite difficult for the officials and the interface with public. Parliamentary privilege is one facet, but there's also the law which we must obey. So if we're to square the circle, it's very difficult to resolve that. For us, it's quite contentious for ourselves, other than any solution that you may be able to identify. The only solution that we would have would to refer to the courts to get some assistance in deciding what we should do. Which way were we going to bend, towards parliamentary or, well, listen, parliamentary privilege is statutory and it's well established. Well, yes, but that would be interesting to a lawyer, a specialist, a constitutionalist, but I'm not that.
That far.
Juste une petite question très rapidement.
Very, very quick, the reform on the CSIS Act, when is this? We're all anxious to see when that will be. Well, I'm not sure. You've heard Minister Leblanc mention on a few occasions that he would hope that the service would obtain correct authorization to be able to share information and documents with other levels of government.
Mr. Angus, your turn.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Vigneault, we were talking in my first round about the cyber attacks that were launched against the National Research Council, Treasury Board, Bank of Canada, various parliamentary institutions in 2014 that were tied back to China, and that began to raise red flags. This year, we had FinTrack pulling its corporate systems offline due to cyber attacks. Were those cyber attacks tied to sources in China, or was this other kind of gang activity?
Mr. Chair, I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific details of that cyber attack. It has not been attributed publicly by FinTrack, the origin of that attack. I can say that, ourselves and our other partners in the national security and cyber community in the government of Canada working directly with FinTrack to support them, but the attribution has not yet been made to this event.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I guess my question is are we seeing an increase in cyber attacks from the People's Republic of China? What is the government doing? What is CSIS doing to address that over the last 10 years?
So, Mr. Chair, I think it's. I would concur with the, or I would say to the question from Mr. Angus that we are seeing and detecting more cyber attacks from the PRC, but also from many other countries, states, but criminal organizations as well. So we see the rise of ransomware that sometimes is purely for criminal nature and to be able to accumulate dollars fraudulently. Sometimes we see those ransomware groups working at the behest of states, and we also see state-sponsored cyber attacks against government entities for spying purposes. But also a very worrying trend, we see some countries are engaging in cyber attacks against our critical infrastructure, and they are directing those attacks at often to pre-position themselves to not necessarily stop or undertake any action, but to be there in when they decide to act on Canada or other countries to force Canada to take a specific policy position. So this is, I think, a area of concern, and the PRC has been publicly called for that in the recent past. I would say that CSIS plays an important and unique role in the what I call the cyber ecosystem. We're working very closely with our partners at the Canadian Cyber for Cybersecurity at the CSC, with our partners at the RCMP and Public Safety Canada, Treasury Board. So what essentially you see, Mr. Angus, is we need to bring this ecosystem of all of the different players who have tools and authorities to do something to really play well, because our security depends on it, and the actors who are attacking Canada for criminal or national security purposes are getting better at it. So we need to increase our own vigilance.
Thank you, Mr. Vigneault.
Thank you.
We're going to do one more round, 5 minutes each, first for Dr. Ellis and then for Mr. Erskine-Smith. So, Dr. Ellis, 5 minutes to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here, and to you, Mr. Vigneault, for being here again. I have a bit of a dilemma in my mind. We've talked at this committee that the things were different before the incident at the National Microbiology Lab, and we've also said that things have changed at the National Microbiology Lab. I guess my contention is when I look at a report, and Mr. Vigneault, I'm sure you're familiar with this report called China in the Age of Strategic Rivalry. It's produced by CSIS in May of 2018. It goes on to talk about a report from CSIS concluded that China was engaging in targeted efforts to co-opt the New Zealand business, political, and intellectual elite. My contention then is that things were really not different when this incident started, at least in August of 2018. So why do we say that it wasn't? Because things were not great then. We knew that China was out there, the PRC was out there looking for secrets from other countries like New Zealand. Why would we think Canada was any different?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll go back memory lane here, and I believe that the report that Mr. Ellis refers to is a document that was sponsored by CSIS, but produced by academics under Chatham House rule. And so this were the conclusions about New Zealand were the conclusions that were made public by by CSIS through this academic report. I remember those details because, as you can imagine, New Zealand, reacted to this report. But I think it's fair to say that even back then, the academic community, the national security community in Canada and across a number of other countries were indeed very worried about the PRC's activity. I believe I mentioned this committee. One of the most significant moments of that change is when the PRC proactively, even not waiting for the final report of the International Court on the jurisdiction, the sovereignty of the South China Sea, preemptively said that they would not respect the ruling. And they say that's our sovereignty. And I think, there's some of these moments that some of them are public, some of them are known through intelligence, that when we start to see a shift. And that shift, I think, is important to put it in perspective. Madame Drouin said something I think that's very important. It is sometimes in our own national interest to collaborate with Chinese entities, but we need to do it with our eyes wide open and make sure that we protect our own base. And I think this is why it's important. If it's good for Canada to collaborate because we can get something good out of it, we must do it, but we must do it and protecting the base.
I'll interrupt you there, Mr. Vigneault, but you know that things were not in great shape. And then we had information from PHAC to CSIS to say there might be threatening actors at the National Microbiology Lab, and it still took more than 10 months to secure the lab, more than 2.5 years. And your contention, sir, has always been that, well, they were Canadian citizens, we had to give them the benefit of the doubt. But as my colleague easily points out, we can get rid of a person who is a bank a senior person here in Canada much more quickly. This is national security. And I guess the other question then is if things were great then, as with regards to security at the National Microbiology Lab, why have they had to change so radically now if they were great then? Clearly they were not. And clearly the situation was not as rosy as you have tried to paint to the committee, sir.
Monsieur le Président, si je peux me permettre, couple of things here. So the nature of research and scientists and their DNA is you need to share the result. You need to work with others. Like this is how they work. So when I say that a shift happened is that now they understand that desire to put their results out there, to share their outcomes with others, come with an important security component.
Ma'am, with all due respect, what we're talking about here is the security. I'm not talking about scientists. I understand that scientists want to share their work, but the security was lax at the lab, and now it is different. That falls squarely on the Prime Minister's shoulders, on your office, ma'am. And I guess the other thing is, it took so long to secure the lab. My only conclusion is that there was political interference to slow down the investigation. And ma'am, you can roll your eyes at that all you want, but what other conclusion could we possibly have that we can get rid of a senior bank executive quicker than we can get rid of potential espionage creating scientists at a national lab with secret facilities?
A very quick response, Ms. Tron.
Maybe one thing, as I said, yes, with retrospect, we can always say that things could have been faster. However, at the beginning, it was not even clear that it was national security issue. It was more lax of administrative procedure. Like it took some time after the fact-finding, after the reference to CSIS, to identify that we were in front of national security. I think now those reflex would be much more faster. And yes, we can say that it should have been faster at the time, but going forward, the reflex will be faster in terms of making the links between those deficiencies, those